Welcome to Human Monsters. This episode deals with the personalities and dangers of life in a maximum security prison. It's not a place for the weak, as you will see. Part 1. Carl Bowles. Carl Bowles suspected that Jeffrey Joe Hicks was a snitch. The problem was, he didn't have evidence. Still, to be so much as suspected of being a snitch in prison means your days are numbered. The way a guy like Carl Bowles saw it, the only good snitch is a dead snitch. Hicks had the appearance and disposition of an easy target. He was 28 years old, slight of build, and had the look of a late-term adolescent. Beyond everything else, he was terrified, and he looked it. To quote Bowles, guys were damn near fighting each other over him. They said, "Oh, we got to protect this poor kid. Why, he's white, and he doesn't want anything to do with the insert racial epithet here. And he is afraid they are going to take him and fuck him. Somebody's got to do something." Bowles was one of the inmates who met Hicks. His story at the time was that he just wanted to give Hicks some advice. The guards didn't buy it. After all, the Federal Bureau of Prisons had Bowles on file as a sexual predator, one who had forced himself on other inmates and prevailed upon them to satisfy his sexual desires. As one guard noted, it wasn't the goodness of his heart that caused Carl Bowles to search out Jeffrey Hicks. It was a lower section of his anatomy. It must have been routine for Bowles since, despite a botched escape, he had spent 23 years of his life in prison. It's no wonder. He had murdered a cop, committed kidnapping, and killed 3 other people. He was detained for the first time at age 12. He had spent most of his life in prison and knew his way around better than anybody. Certainly, few were more qualified to give advice, even if he did have an ulterior motive. He approached Jeffrey Hicks just days after Hicks began doing time. He said, "First time in a penitentiary?" "Yeah." "It can be pretty scary until a man figures out what's going on." "Where are you from?" "A state joint in Michigan." "Oh yeah? Well, what they got you for?" I can't say. I got an appeal, still in court." "Sure, kid." With that, Bowles dropped his cigarette to the floor, stamped it out, and left. Bowles reflected on this occasion months later. He said, "When Hicks told me he was a state prisoner from Michigan and then refused to tell me his crime, I knew there was something spooky about him. You see, there are only 2 reasons why the feds accept state prisoners. The guy is either such a mean son of a bitch that the state joint can't handle him, or the state has to get rid of him because he'll be killed by convicts if they put him in a state joint. Now, even an idiot can see that Hicks ain't no ruthless motherfucker. So I figured there was something wrong with him. I figured he was a snitch." It took 2 weeks for the prison officials to process Hicks's paperwork. During that time, Bowles lost interest in him, but another sexual predator and murderer invited Hicks to share his cell. Both guards and inmates assumed that Hicks had become the inmate's punk, meaning he was exchanging sexual favors for protection. It didn't turn out that way. In fact, everyone was surprised to find out that Hicks and his cellmate were plotting to escape by helicopter. It was Hicks' cellmate who attempted to hire a helicopter pilot to land in the yard and fly them away. Hicks was punished by being put in an isolation cell in the hole. His cellmate was transferred to the federal facility in Marion, Illinois, which is known as the most brutal prison in the United States. The inmates of that facility are kept in locked cells 23 hours a day and receive very few privileges. As for the helicopter pilot, Bowles said, "The only way guards find out anything in here is when someone snitches." Someone had tipped off the cops to that helicopter plot, and it sure as hell wasn't the guy who got shipped to Marion. After that, I was certain Hicks was a snitch. When Hicks was released from solitary, a white inmate took him into a cell and made him his fuck boy. Bowles knew the inmate. They were friends. He was concerned that Hicks would get him into trouble. Bowles decided to investigate Hicks' background. To do that, he paid a visit to Harold Gooden. Gooden was doing time for counterfeiting. Otherwise, he was a Navy veteran and a university-educated intellectual who was widely read and writing a novel in his spare time. Bowles was seeking some reading material in his own right. After knocking on Gooden's cell, he said, "I need to borrow a few magazines." "Help yourself, Carl. Anything in particular?" "True crime." Gooden subscribed to detective magazines because they frequently published the names of convicted criminals. The criminals he kept abreast of in particular were sex offenders. Snitches occupied the bottom level of the prison's hierarchy. Just above that level was that of sex offenders, especially pedophiles. The inmates despised them for giving convicts a bad name, though they also hate them for the same reason as outsiders. They also hated rapists of women. The magazines Bowles took back to his cell hadn't yielded any useful leads. When he returned them to Wooden's cell, Wooden handed him an edition of a periodical called Inside Detective. Wooden had folded over an article he felt Bowles might take an interest in. It displayed a photo of a 13-year-old boy who had been pulled off the road while riding his bicycle on October 19, 1986. It happened in Green Oak Township, Michigan. The driver of a Jeep jumped out of his vehicle, grabbed the boy, dragged him inside the Jeep, and drove away. A few days later, the boy's body was found naked and deceased in a forest. He had been molested and strangled. When Bowles turned the page, a photo of Jeffrey Joe Hicks stared right back at him. Hicks was really in trouble now, especially since the caption underneath his photograph read, "Hicks has a long history of molesting children sexually." He read the rest of the article in his cell. It turned out Hicks committed his first offense against a child in January 1975. He was 16 years old and abducted a 12-year-old boy at knife point. He forced him to swallow some tranquilizers and molested him. He was sentenced to 5 years probation. 7 years later, he raped 2 other children, but was released on probation again. He was only incarcerated after committing both kidnapping and murder. He appealed to the jury for mercy because he himself had been a victim of molestation. They were unmoved. He was sentenced to life in prison for 65 to 100 years. He was put in a federal prison because cases tend to attract the most publicity in the state in which they were tried. In a state prison, his likelihood of being tortured and even murdered by other inmates was just about guaranteed. In a federal facility, it was less likely unless someone learned about his crimes through serendipity. Bowles went to Hicks's cellmate and showed him the magazine article. Hicks wasn't there. His cellmate said, "Why, that little fuck." Bowles passed Hicks on the way to the library, where he was going to photocopy the article. Hicks happened to be walking from the other direction from whence he had been doing his cellmate's laundry. Bowles showed Hicks his photo in the article. A voice was heard from behind them. "You little bastard." It was Hicks's cellmate. Hicks panicked and dropped his laundry. He ran to a guard station, and they escorted him out of the cell block. It would no longer be necessary for Bowles to make a copy, but he made one for himself. As he put it, "I spread the word about Hicks because I wanted everyone to see how the cops in here work. The guards will deny it, but I know exactly what happened. Some hack from Michigan called up a lieutenant here and said, 'Hey, I got a prisoner, and I got to get him out of my state institution before someone kills him.' Now, a lieutenant here says, 'Well, why should we take him? Does he cooperate?' And the guy in Michigan says, 'Fuck yes, he'll cooperate, because if he don't, we'll tell everyone he's a baby raper, and they'll kill his ass.' When Hicks gets down here, the lieutenant says, 'Hey boy, we will put you in population, but at the same time, you got to come to us every once in a while and tell us things, because if you don't, then someone might just slip up and let folks know your past.' Don't you see what happens next? Suddenly, some lieutenant is breaking up a big helicopter escape. One Lieutenant Gallegos disputes this, saying, 'He's telling how he operates, how he thinks, how he manipulates people. We don't do that. No one forced Hicks to say or do anything. Believe me, we don't have to do anything to force these guys to snitch. Most will tell on each other in a second.' He denied that Hicks was a snitch. This prisoner was sent to Leavenworth because of the length of his sentence. We felt he needed to be placed in a high-security environment. A few days after Bowles exposed Hicks, however, the young inmate was quietly transferred to a lower-security federal prison in another state. The prison grapevine is such that we had to move this prisoner to a much lower security prison, an official explained. Otherwise, his past would have been exposed and we would have been in danger. Bowles stuck to his guns. I don't care what they say. They used Hicks, and now they are rewarding him by moving him to an easier joint. That's how both sides work in this place. When someone weak like Hicks comes in, then each side preys on him. After Hicks disappeared from the scene, Bowles found out that another such specimen arrived. He heard that Thomas Edgar Little was frightened of the life that awaited him at the prison. He was young and weak, just like Jeffrey Joe Hicks. As Bowles saw him, he was ripe for the picking. Part 2. Dallas Scott. They say you should never play cards with a guy named after a city. Boston, Chicago, Dallas. I don't know how Dallas Earl Scott stacked up as a card player and gambler, though such activities are commonplace in prisons. To get a basic sketch of Scott's character, I'll quote his end of a phone call. Now, this has already gone on for a week and a half. The position you're putting people in, particularly your boyfriend, Bill, you're putting a lot of pressure on him, and a lot of people are beginning to get upset. When he uttered the word upset, you could have practically seen the italics slipping from his mouth. He wanted to make it abundantly clear to the unidentified female on the other end that he would hurt her boyfriend really bad if she didn't comply with Scott's wishes. While on the phone, he couldn't specify what he wanted Bill to do for him because the calls were monitored and recorded. The woman had promised to smuggle 2.73 grams of heroin into Leavenworth. Scott paid his contacts in Sacramento $500 for the drugs and another $500 to Bill Hutchinson, the inmate who was the boyfriend of the woman he was speaking to. Bill was confident that his girlfriend would gladly play the role of mule, but she was taciturn all of a sudden. Drugs are usually trafficked into prison vaginally or anally, which may have been her primary concern. Scott even had the stash mailed to her so she could do it. And while nobody likes to be disappointed by anything, Dallas Earl Scott was known to lash out when people did not obey his instructions. Bill's girlfriend balked, and now the deal fell through, or at least for the time being. Dallas wasn't finished with her. After Bill placed a call to her, he passed the handset to Dallas. Dallas got on the line and said, "Pressure is being put on Bill, you see. You got him. Ah, well. He's in a spot because you said yes from Jump Street, and that triggered a lot of things. That leaves him holding the bag, and now you got cold feet. Look, I can understand why you were scared, and I appreciate that, but we got to get this thing resolved. If you just do what Bill asks you, it's not going to be near as bad as you think. In your mind, you got pictures of being beaten with rubber hoses and being dragged off. That's not going to happen." The standard procedure of such a transaction had already been explained to her. The heroin would be delivered to her in a balloon. She was to stick the balloon inside her vagina like a tampon. Once inside the prison, she would remove it in the women's washroom and place it in her mouth. From there, she could pass it to Bill through an open-mouth kiss. Later, Bill would either puke it up or pick it out of his feces. Good times. Scott said it's just a simple matter of boom, boom, and that's it. Believe me, this thing happens 1,000 times a year. Don't make monsters in your mind. Though he felt he had made himself clear for the most part, Scott issued one more warning to Bill's girlfriend before handing the phone back to Bill. "Now, I'm sure you understand what goes on in here. You know, this place, well, it's dangerous." Dallas didn't have to invest much effort toward intimidating people. He was described by a bank teller in a trial as real mean-looking. He had been in and out of prison over the span of 24 years, and he was the epitome of the hardened criminal. An addiction to heroin that nearly killed him, and a bout with hepatitis that left him looking like he was carved out of rock. His skin was yellowed with jaundice. His face was gaunt. He was built like a football player after years of lifting weights. You didn't need a capacity for intuition or telepathy to know he was bad news. If you didn't provoke his bad side, you would have found him to be easygoing, streetwise, funny, and devoted to his wife and children in his limited capacity. Most likely he was so easygoing because he knew nobody was stupid enough to challenge him. His body was a gallery of tattoos, done in classic prison style, one color with very few smooth lines. He had the number 666 etched over his heart, so that if you were curious to know he had Satan on speed dial, the evidence was on display. Whether he believed in the existence of the Antichrist or not, it didn't hurt to fashion himself an image as such behind the prison's walls. He was rumored to have been a hitman for a biker gang, but it was never proven. He committed 2 armed robberies, and that was what convinced the courts that he must be incarcerated for over 3 decades. They just knew he was trouble. As Dallas remarked, "My criminal record ain't shit, but if you look at how they treat me, you'd think I was some sort of Jesse James or Godfather." A federal bureau member gave a more clarifying evaluation of Dallas's criminal potential. He is definitely Aryan Brotherhood, and once a convict becomes an AB, he is an AB for life. What we are dealing with is a professional, lifelong criminal. An AB member like Dallas Scott is actually doing a life sentence, only he's doing it on the installment plan, serving a few years at a time. Dallas waited outside of Bill's cell, awaiting the arrival of the goods. Bill returned from the phone. He said, "She's going to do it this week sometime." If Bill and his girlfriend didn't come through for Dallas, it wouldn't just result in a punishment for Bill. Dallas would suffer a hit to his reputation. If it got out that Bill and his girlfriend took him for a ride and got away with it, Dallas would be seen as soft and weak, and that's the last thing you need in a prison like Leavenworth. It would mean that the poker game he ran would be a losing proposition for him, since none of the inmates would fear the consequences of not paying up. It would mean that someone could steal his possessions, which is taboo in prison. It was a slippery slope, so if Bill's girlfriend chickened out on them, he would need to beat Bill at least within an inch of his life. Dallas was so tough, he even assaulted a guard once. Some of the other guards took him to the hole and beat him up in retaliation. It made no lasting impact on Dallas, as he put it. There are 2 sides in prison, and only 2. If one side gives an inch, the other side tries to grab 2 inches. That's just how it is. You never willingly give up ground. When it came to guards, Dallas had a policy of his own. If they are respectful, I return respect. If they speak in a courteous manner, I will speak in a courteous manner. But if they want to start that silly shit, then I'm going to push back. Hard. Some guards approached Dallas's cell and said, "We need you to come with us." The guards took him to a lieutenant's office. The lieutenant said, "You are being charged with attempting to smuggle contraband inside a federal penitentiary, to wit, 2.73 grams of heroin." Got anything to say? This is bullshit. I didn't do a fucking thing. And I don't know anything about any heroin. Guards escorted Dallas back to his cell. He groused to them about the charge, saying, "This is a bum beef. Total bullshit." He complained for days about it, and one morning a friendly guard delivered some more news. The FBI had a copy of the recorded phone conversation consisting of Scott threatening Bill's girlfriend. Dallas deflected this, saying, No one has my voice on tape. They may have someone's voice on tape, but they will never be able to prove it as mine. Bill Hutchinson was transferred quietly to another facility late at night, so Dallas couldn't kill him. Hutchinson and his girlfriend cut a deal with the FBI so that in exchange for the leniency of a plea bargain, they could testify against Dallas. A snitch strikes again. Of these new charges, Dallas said, "Fuck the government. This is a bullshit charge. I don't know nothing about any heroin," said the guy who nearly died from an overdose of horse. Apropos to nothing, but they make pot and hash cookies. Are there heroin cookies? Just curious. Part 3, William Post. William Post was walking with a jaunty step. He had served 15 years of a 45-year sentence, and it came to his attention that the Federal Parole Commission decided to review his appeal for leniency. He was in prison for armed robbery, and parole boards often went easy on convicts who had served a third of their sentences. Post had an exemplary behavioral record in prison and had even earned a university degree. He participated in group therapy sessions, which led to a prison psychiatrist characterizing him as, quote, "a highly motivated and cooperative individual who has made a positive contribution to the group." A counselor praised him for, quote, "gaining significant insight into his behavior and making an excellent institutional adjustment." With all of those accolades, he was sure to make a positive impression on the parole board. As far as his feelings about the outside world were concerned, he said, "You got to cut yourself off from such thoughts. You have to deal with the reality of where you physically are, not daydream about the streets." Many prisons include pets among their population. Some animal shelters have set up programs in cooperation with prisons so that inmates can adopt a cat. The shelter normally provides funding for such necessities as litter and cat food. This prison did not provide any funding for the cat's needs. In fact, they wanted to get rid of the cats, feeling that there was an overpopulation of cats, and they were upgraded in status by them from pet to pest. William Post became known as the Cat Man because he took care of 6 cats. While prison staff acknowledged that the cats were beneficial to the institution in the sense that they killed rodents, the administration still felt that there were too many of them. At one point, it became known to the officials that the inmates would kill any guard that got rid of a cat. A compromise was reached. As long as the inmates took care of the cats instead of letting them run rampant and reproducing at will, they would not be removed from the prison. Otherwise, there were hundreds of cats in the prison, and it had become unmanageable. Post would play with the kittens to the point where he almost became feline in his own right, meowing and rolling around with them. The staff and inmates thought he was nuts, but Post didn't care. Post reflected on the impact institutional life made on him. "Lately, I've been having scary thoughts. Being in here gets to you, day after day after day. Sometimes I think about what it would be like to just go into a bank and blow the head off the first teller I see. I know that I am capable of that. I mean, any criminal is capable of that. And long-term prisoners can kill easier than most people because you are around the dregs so much and for so long that you forget the worth of a human life. You think all humans are dregs. The guards are no different. They are dregs. broken by the same system. It is for this reason that the cats became so important to him, as he noted. I don't want to be a mass murderer, a killer. The cats keep me feeling some warmth, some kind of feeling connected to something other than those dregs or us dregs. The cats are what I need to remind me that I still have some standards and have not yet gone to the bottom where you are capable of anything. Not everybody inside Leavenworth had that perspective, as Post pointed out. The truth is, some of these guys really like it here. It's their home, but it's not mine. That's why I don't clean my cell. I want to remind myself that it isn't my cell. Guys in here refer to their cell as being their house. This isn't my house. It's theirs, and if they want it clean, then they can clean it. Post read about a parole case that he found encouraging. A man named Lawrence Singleton was convicted in 1978 of not only raping a 15-year-old hitchhiker, but he cut off her arms with an axe and left her for dead by the side of the road. He was paroled after serving 9 years. Commenting on this case, Post said, "If a guy like that can get a parole after 9 years, and I can't get one for a simple bank robbery after serving 15 years, then I got to wonder what kind of message they are trying to send me. Does that mean I'm worse than Lawrence Singleton? If the parole board makes me stay here for 25 years, are they telling me I am twice as bad as a guy like him? Twice as bad? And if that's the case, what am I allowed to do? Am I missing out on not taking advantage? The next time I rob a bank, why not rape the teller or shoot everyone? Since society already has said to me that I am twice as bad as someone who rapes a little kid and chops off her arms? Where is the justice in turning him loose and keeping me in prison? I committed none of the mindless random violence of the terrorist or airplane hijacker. None of my crimes was designed specifically to harm people, as is the murderer. And none of my crimes had the countless victims, as had the large-scale heroin dealers. Perhaps it's rationalization on my part, but I have always tried to think of my crimes in terms of permanent damage. And I don't think that bank robbery causes permanent damage. Maybe a teller gets so scared she wets her pants, but it's not a crime like rape. Post got a response from the parole board in the form of a letter. The contents of the letter. In response to your plea for a more lenient decision, you provide no significant mitigating circumstances sufficient to merit a different decision. Your institutional behavior and achievements have been considered by the Commission, but are not deemed sufficient to warrant a more lenient decision. Your plea is therefore denied. Post went outside to the prison's yard, where he tracked down his favorite cat, whose name was Tiger. Post was angry, not at the parole board. He was angry at himself for being so optimistic. Reflecting on the parole board's evaluation of him, he said, "How can I take these people seriously when they tell me I'm worse than a guy who rapes a girl, chops off her arms, and throws her out on the side of a road?" Part 3, Thomas Edgar Little. One man tells the story of how he felt being dispatched to Leavenworth. He said, "I was upset. No, it was more than that. I was scared shitless. I couldn't believe I was being sent to Leavenworth." He was 26 years old and convicted of 2 armed robberies in Florida. He had never done time in prison before, and to find out that he would serve in Leavenworth, aka the hot house, well, you can't fault him for dreading the experience. The bus that drove him to the prison was well staffed. 3 prison guards were aboard. One sat in back in a metal cage with a shotgun on his lap. Another sat up front with a shotgun on his lap. The third was armed with a pistol while driving. There was surely no welcome wagon, though a black inmate said to Little, "Hey, white boy, they gonna love your ass in prison." He punctuated it with a laugh, whose ominous overtones required no further explanation. Little ignored him. At one time, Thomas Little romanticized prison, feeling like having a prison stay in his personal history would craft an image for him as a tough guy. He knew it was inevitable that he would be incarcerated at some point. As he noted, "I liked stealing things, but I wasn't very good at it because my mama had raised me to think like a square John." While he was in jail awaiting his trial and sentencing, he found out that there were downsides to being a thief. For instance, 3 inmates ordered him to gratify them sexually. When he refused, as all the newbies do, they ganged up on him in a full-on assault. He deflected their blows with a mop handle until a guard came along and broke it up. Taking that into account, after finding out he was going to do time in Leavenworth, he said, "I figured if this shit happens in a county jail, then imagine what Leavenworth is going to be like." On the plane, an experienced inmate named Gary gave Thomas some advice. In the context of survival, he said, "Every convict has 3 choices, but only 3. He can fight, kill someone. He can hit the fence, escape. Or he can fuck, submit. You're gonna need someone to show you around. Ask for Carl Bowles. No one fucks with him." When he arrived with the other inmates at Leavenworth, Thomas went through the same preparatory protocols as everyone else. All the inmates were ordered to disrobe and stand next to each other in a horizontal formation. One of the guards yelled, "Run your fingers briskly through your hair." Once they complied with this directive, the guard said, "Open your mouth, stick out your tongue." A guard peered into the mouths of all the inmates to ensure they weren't smuggling weapons or other contraband. The guard shouted, "Lift up your dick and balls." Once again, a guard inspected their gear to make sure they weren't carrying anything they were not within their rights to possess. The guard said, "Turn around, bend over, and spread your cheeks." Though the prison staff insist that this last measure is carried out to ensure that inmates are not trafficking drugs, weapons, or other illegal items, Little found out that even if it was performed for that purpose, it was also done to establish intimidation in the dynamics of the inmates' relationships with the guards. Psychological leverage was certainly crucial when it came to dealing with murderers, rapists, and other violent people. Then there was the so-called digital examination, where a guard would spread an inmate's ass cheeks apart to find out if there was any kind of contraband contained within. Satisfied that the so-called fish or new inmates were not in possession of contraband, the inmates were issued an outfit of clothing and taken to an area where their mugshot was taken and they were fingerprinted. Afterwards, Thomas was taken to his cell. It was late afternoon, a time when many inmates have a rest period. Little wasn't about to leave himself that vulnerable. As he pointed out, all I wanted to do was get a piece of pipe and crawl into some corner. I just wanted to be left alone. At some point, an inmate stopped by Little's cell. He introduced himself, saying, "Thomas, I'm Carl Bowles." Bowles gave him a rundown on how to conduct himself in Leavenworth's hostile environment. "Look, you're in prison now. You need to keep your mouth shut. Stay out of people's way, and don't cultivate friends. I don't care how nice they are. Don't take nothing from anybody, because you don't know the man's intent. You don't know whether he is a good person or not. Any man can walk up to you and tell you anything. You might be impressed by the way he looks. He might be a weightlifter. He might be clean and neat. He might have books under his arms, but you don't know his real intent. I'm like every other asshole in here. You don't know me any better than anyone else. But I work out in the East Yard with flowers. You come out there someday and look at those flowers, if that's what you want to do. You come out there and look around, and I'll be out there, and I'll make sure you can go to the yard anytime you want. I'll make sure no one fucks with you." Reflecting on this at a later date, Thomas said, "You know, I wanted to go out there the very next day, out to the yard and look at the flowers, but I didn't want to be caught dead in prison looking at flowers. There was no fucking way that I was going near him and flowers, because you think, ooh, flowers, there's the pretty boy looking at the flowers." The morning after their initial meeting, Bowles stopped by Little's cell again. All he said was, "You okay? Need anything?" Little just said, "I'm okay, thanks." Bowles departed. Little remarked, "I was scared to leave my cell. Guys were coming by, acting friendly, offering to do things for me, bring me stuff from the commissary. It was just like Carl had said it would be. I was ready to snap." The next morning, Bowles stopped by again. This time, Little asked if they could talk. Bowles assented, and he took Thomas to his cell. As Little recalled, Carl sat on the bunk, and I sat in a chair. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him I felt like I was on the moon and didn't know what to do. "Well, what do you want to do?" "I'd like to draw. I want to study mathematics. I want to work out with weights, and I want people to leave me alone. I just want to be left alone." "Okay, you can do those things." "But how?" "Just breathe." "What?" "Just do 'em, that's all." "Well, it ain't that simple. I just can't go out there in the yard and do those things." "Sure you can. Why can't you?" "'Cause I just can't." "You can if you want to. I'll show you how you can. Look at me, I'm not some big beefed up motherfucker, but I haven't had to stab anyone in 23 years. It's how you carry yourself in here that matters, and how you think. You can learn those things. I can teach you." "What do you want?" "I'm just looking for a friend. That's all, just a friend." A guard known as Sandels observed Little in his interactions with Bowles. He had a feeling that Little's days as a victim were imminent. He took him aside one day and said, "You are young, and you probably will get a lot of sexual pressure. Do you know what Carl's about?" Little said nothing. Sandels continued, "Hey man, Carl Bowles is a homosexual predator, and he's looking to make you his wife. He'll have you waiting on him, having sex with him, doing whatever he demands. You'll be a slave, and when he's tired of you, he'll sell you to someone else." Little didn't want to accept this. He said, "I know people think he is a homosexual, But we are not homosexuals. Everyone thinks he is pressuring me, but he is not. And if you want to believe that he is, then that's fine, but we aren't doing anything. That stuff about Carl's bullshit. Sandell said, well, if you have any problems, I know the situation you are in, and you can just come by and see me, and I will take care of you. Sandels later insisted that he was sincere in his intention to help Little. As he noted, I wanted to help because when you were young, something like this could fuck you up for the rest of your life. But the truth is, I really couldn't do anything for him if he had asked. The problem was, even if Little had accepted Sandel's help, he would have been perceived by the rest of the prison population as a snitch, and once that happens, you're a dead man walking. After his talk with Sandels, Little went to Bowles' cell. He reported on what they discussed. He told me to stay away from you. Bowles was not lacking for a rebuttal. Look here. The cops have a category in prison for everything. If more than 3 people get together in a prison, then they're members of a gang. If there are 2 people, you're both homosexuals. And if you hang by yourself, you're antisocial. That's just how cops are. Now here's the thing, Thomas. You are in here 24 hours a day. The cop is here 8 hours. The cop is not suffering the same thing you are suffering. The cop is not here to see you going through these mind changes. I have little faith in having them protect me in here. Why, I can't even find a lieutenant when I want to find him. If I was getting stabbed right now and went looking for Lieutenant Sandels, I probably couldn't even find him. You got to deal with the reality of this place. Who means more to a guy in here? Who is in here 24 hours a day with him? Who is here to talk to him, help him through difficult times? It's very simple. Don't you understand that trust and reliance are built on very little things? Okay, when I don't get my mail, I go up to the officer and I ask him if he knows where it is. I don't know where the fuck your mail is. Check with the fucking mailroom, he says. Now listen to me, if this cop is not concerned about my mail, does he really care about me? Or when I go to the chow hall and the doors are being closed and I tell the officer there that I'm late, but I have a reason, and he says, fuck your reason, you're out of dinner. Now, when those things happen, those little things, why the fuck do you think that Sandels or any other cop is going to give a shit about you and whether you are being preyed upon? He isn't in here 24 hours a day. I am. He says he is going to protect you. Well, what are you going to do the 16 hours that he is off duty? Little nodded. Bowles was making sense. The reason that Sandels wants to help you is because he really wants to use you. He's going to tell you, hey, a guy in here, he pretty much makes his own bed. If you want to help us, then we can help you. These convicts, they don't give a fuck about you, but I can help you, and all you have to do is help me. Give me a little bit of information here and there, and I can help you get a transfer or help keep those predators away. It doesn't have to be anything really serious. Why, just tell us who was drinking the other night up on your tier. That's all. Something small like that. I've seen guys fall in that trap. See, it doesn't matter what you tell them, because once you've crossed that line, you're a snitch, and they know it, and they got you. It's just a fucking trap. Everyone in the world is trying to use everyone else in here. That's how life is, and that's what it is all about in this joint. Now, you go back to your cell, and you think about what I just told you. And if you were afraid of me and afraid I'm going to fuck you, then you just tell me, and we will go our separate ways. I told you, Thomas. All I'm looking for is a friend. Little left Bowles' cell soon after this rant. Little faced a serious dilemma, not to mention a moral and legal quagmire. As he put it, I didn't want to have to kill someone in prison. I didn't come here to get a life sentence, but I didn't want to have guys fucking me either. For some quick comic relief, I'm going to quote Robin Williams. Isn't it strange to think that if you commit sodomy in Georgia, they're going to put you in a cell with another man who's going to sodomize you? As Little saw it, he was faced with two choices. Move into Bowles' cell and be protected while getting raped by Bowles, or strike out on his own and fend for himself among the general population. Both options presented danger. He heard about an inmate known as Cyclops because he had a glass eye. He was known for turning fish into fuckboys, and he was very effective. Fuckboy is a term used to describe an inmate who is not gay but has been forced into prostitution within prison by a pimp. The pimp may be compensated with money or things like drugs and cigarettes. Imagine getting raped by some guy's battering ram of a penis, and it's all because your rapist pimp wants a pack of smokes? Who knows if they use condoms and lube? He didn't want to kill Cyclops, and he didn't want to be anybody's fish. Kill and elongate his sentence, or allow himself to be raped until he's wearing diapers. A lose-lose proposition. He had to make a decision soon. This is what he came up with. I decided to use Carl. I sure did. I figured, okay, Thomas, you're in Leavenworth. Carl Bowles is the best thing you got going for you. You'd better grab onto this guy and do what's necessary to be his friend. Eddie Goach was in charge of the cell house where Bowles lived. He processed Little's request to share a cell with Bowles. Eddie's take on this situation. The truth is that Bowles is doing everyone a favor. Little is the sort of guy who can't take care of himself in here, and if we tell him he can't live with Bowles, then Bowles won't be able to protect him from other convicts. There will be heaps of problems for everyone, particularly Little. As long as Bowles and Little don't do anything out of line, then it's really no one's business. The request was granted. From the moment Little moved into Bowles' cell, word spread throughout the prison population that Little was not to be fucked with. Lest Bowles dish out some punishment the offender might not walk away from. That said, it wasn't prestigious for Little, especially when his nickname among the inmates was the new Mrs. Bowles. Once Little got situated in Bowles' cell, Bowles asked him why he was sent to Leavenworth. It didn't make sense to Bowles that they would place a convict in such a dangerous environment just because of a single bank robbery, the first in his criminal history. There is a point system whereby the corrections system evaluates a convict's suitability when it comes to placing them in a prison. The more violent the offender, the more points they receive. The convicts with the most points are placed in the maximum and super maximum security prisons. Bowles figured Little was either lying about his record or the system had made a mistake. Little insisted that he hadn't done anything to justify placing him in Leavenworth, though he did admit that he failed inspection at a Florida jail because 2 of the bars had been cut. He said, "They accused me of trying to escape." Well, did they ever charge you with escape? No. They blamed me for it, but they couldn't prove it. Bowles took Little to see his case manager. The case managers keep track of what is happening in an inmate's life, everything from periodical subscriptions to the appeals process. Bowles ordered Little to request a printout of his arrest and conviction record. An inmate cannot request another inmate's paperwork. When Bowles saw Little's criminal history, he said, "Looky here, they got you down as an extreme escape risk." Because he had tried to escape, the system decided that a maximum security facility like Leavenworth was the only kind of institution that could guarantee that Little could not escape. Of this, Little said, "But I was never even charged with escape." "This says you were." "Come on." Bowles said to the case manager, "You can't classify a guy on what you think he might have done, only what you can prove he did." Ultimately, the point system was not a legal precedent. Rather, it is more like a guideline corrections officers turn to when evaluating an inmate's eligibility for doing time in a particular kind of facility. There was no legal obligation to house Little based on points. Bowles said, "What if we get some written proof that shows Little don't belong here?" Once they were back at their cell, Bowles told Little to write down the names of his lawyer, the judge who sentenced him, the prosecutor, the sheriff, and the guards who found the severed bars. The idea was to write a letter to every individual to ask them to help Little with his housing assignment. Bowles said finding the evidence would be easy, but that it would be difficult to persuade a member of the Leavenworth staff to concede that the Bureau of Prisons' evaluation of Little's criminal status was erroneous. Bowles told him, "If we can get just one staff member to take your side, we can get you out of here. But getting one of these fat-ass bastards to stick out his neck is going to be fucking difficult." Little reflected on how all this made him feel. No one in the system gave a damn about me. They all knew I didn't belong in a maximum security prison. I stuck out, but none of the staff did anything to help, and they all knew what would happen to me. But here is this supposedly mad dog killer coming to my aid, and he figures out how this bureau fucked up my case within a few days, and he is writing letters trying to help me. Carl Bowles was the only person in Leavenworth who really gave a shit about me. Carl Bowles and Thomas Little were as thick as thieves at this point. They even dressed in a similar way. In the eyes of the rest of the prison population, Thomas Little was devoid of individuality. They viewed him as becoming an extension of Carl Bowles to a point that the process had been dehumanizing. Thomas reiterated a belabored point. "I am not a homosexual. I am not Carl's kid or punk or wife or anything else, except for one thing. I am Carl's friend." Little insisted that Bowles saved his life. In some ways, Carl and I are identical, and in some ways we are so far fucking apart. But Carl and I have talked and talked and talked, probably for 1,000 hours. And after I tell him something, he will say to me, "You know, I've had those feelings before." And I will say to him, "You had those feelings?" I mean, he has felt just like I have. And he has taught me that it is okay to think like I do. It's okay to feel like I do. And no one else has ever told me that. Everyone else told me my thoughts were wrong or bad or evil. I have never had any real friends. But Carl Bowles listens and he understands. It was a sensitive subject for Bowles, too. As one inmate noted, "Carl is fucking crazy, man. You disrespect him like that, and he'll rip out your throat before you know what's happening. Ever look in his eyes? Them is dead men's eyes. No emotion, nothing but blackness. Bowles did address this subject after being asked about the rumors that were going around about his relationship with Thomas Little. Bowles said, "Sex is easy to get in prison. You don't have to prey on someone. This morning, an orderly who works in the lieutenant's office said to me, 'Hey, Carl, you sure are looking good. I'd like to suck your dick sometime.' Now, he is a homosexual, a known homosexual who enjoys it. Why would anyone have to be a sexual predator in here when it's that easy to get? See, sex is easy to find, but finding a friend is damn near impossible, because no one trusts anyone in here. Look, I've been in prison for 23 fucking years, straight. You don't think I've not gotten lonely during that time? You don't think I don't need someone as a friend or someone to love me? Everyone is always worried about sex, okay? But there are different kinds of love. Just because you love someone doesn't mean you want to fuck them. God damn, I mean, that's a perverted way of looking at things. Sex isn't everything. There is companionship, understanding, consideration, sharing tough times together, having a guy who knows exactly what you were talking about, so when he says, 'God damn, that's fucked up,' you understand. Because you know it is fucked up too. Is that homosexual to have a friend like that? Or is that just being a human being? Of course, my dick still gets hard. Sex drive is natural. Being in prison is what isn't natural. This whole society in here is perverted. Do you think I don't know the difference between a man and a woman? Bullshit. Sex with a man is a poor substitute. A poor substitute at best. But look around. Do you see any women in here? So, what do you do? What do you do? It drives you crazy. I've tried not to think about it, but there isn't a day in here when you don't look at television or look at a magazine and see something arousing. Some guys just try to kill it, pretend their sex drive is dead. Why? Because they are scared of becoming homosexuals. Oh my God, am I turning gay because I want someone to hold, to touch, to love me? No one wants to be a homosexual in here because they are usually the weakest motherfuckers around and are considered as low as a snitch. But I've never met a motherfucker that is so fucking cold that he doesn't give a damn about another person. Never. I've never met another person who doesn't need some physical contact with another human being. Can you imagine not being able to touch another human being for 23 fucking years? So what do you do? What do you do? Do you run behind everyone's back and have some homosexual suck you off while you look around the whole time and don't enjoy it because you are worried that someone will see you? Or do you jack yourself crazy every night looking at fucking pictures? This is reality, man. I ain't had no pussy in 23 fucking years. What do you do? I'll tell you what you do. You recognize that sex is a strong desire, but there are different kinds of love, and if you lower your standard, then you destroy yourself. It's like food. If you start eating the slop that they throw into the trash compactor, and you say, it's okay, this is still food, then you have lowered your standard, and it drops you down. You can't lower your standard, because once you do, all your standards drop. Every one of them. You got to cling to what is pure. You got to cling to what is good. And what is the purest thing? The purest relationship is one of love, not one based on sex. And that comes with friendship and caring about another human being and being there for that person just like he is there for you. The cops will tell you that I'm a predator, but you try to find one person in 23 fucking years who I've preyed on. There are 15 or 20 cases, guys who I've helped through the years Ask any one of them and they will tell you, oh yeah, Carl, well, he'd probably fuck me if I let him, but he never pressed me out of anything. He's my friend. He cared about me and helped me. That's what is pure. What do I want with Thomas Little? I want someone I can develop a friendship with. I want someone who will say, hey, old Carl Bowles, society may think he's a piece of shit, but he's my friend. He is someone who I care about. He made a difference in my life. Bowles came across as sincere as he made the preceding statements. Little was convinced of Bowles' convictions, possibly to his peril, but at least Bowles came across as a truthful man. Then again, there is never a shortage of liars and con artists in a federal prison. And that concludes part 1 of Life Inside Leavenworth Prison. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.